What is up, Flick fans? Welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking Star Wars and honesty time. I was supposed to actually put this video out yesterday, but I sat and I pondered and I thought about the madness that was going to inevitably go down in the comments section, regardless of what my list was going to be, because with these Star Wars lists, the most divisive grouping of videos I've ever seen on YouTube, because someone is always on the side of the prequels or the Disney movies. I mean, everybody's on the side of the original trilogy, but everyone falls on every single side, so every single list that I've seen is controversial. No matter what's number one, no matter what is at the bottom, doesn't matter. All of these lists are controversial. So I thought about putting my sanity at risk here, taking the trip through the comment section. Then I kept thinking, I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I've only seen the brand new film, The Rise of Skywalker, one time. And as many times as I've seen these other movies, they're constantly changing up and down my list. I just can't make my mind up, especially on the newer, the Disney movies. I started out loving some of them, and that's slowly waned away. I started out being mediocre on some of them, and I've slowly raised my thoughts. With rewatch comes changing of opinion, and that's really happened with almost every Star Wars film, except for some of the ones that I just absolutely love, no matter who tells me not to, right? But we're going to get into today's tier list, but today I've switched up some things. This is not laid out like my normal tier list format, because this is Star Wars. You have to do something different for Star Wars, so take a look at this tier list. So here's what I'm doing today. I have 5 tiers as of now, and right now those 5 tiers are Incredible Star Wars, Great Star Wars, Good Star Wars, Okay Star Wars, and Mediocre Star Wars. You're noticing that I don't have bad Star Wars. Well, 1, we're only talking about the live-action movies, and 2, and I said this in my review for Rise of Skywalker, Star Wars is like cake. I love cake. Sometimes I like one flavor of cake more than another flavor, but it's still cake, and I can still eat it and enjoy it, whether I love it for the movie or the execution or not. And I feel that way about some of these movies, and some of the films that I'm going to put at the bottom may offend you. And I'll have you know that I grew up with some of the movies at the bottom of my list. So I am the guy that has the nostalgia for some of these films, but I just can't get past the filmmaking for a few at the bottom of the list. But once again, it's still cake. There's still something I love in every single Star Wars film, and that's what I'm going to hope to convey to you guys today. But here's what I need from you. I need you in the comments section, being as impartial as possible, putting your lists, having nice discussions, not tearing each other down, because we've come to the end of the saga, guys. Say what you will about how they ended it. This is it, right, with the Skywalker, as far as we know, saga. So it would be nice if we can come together and really celebrate what these guys have done over the last 40 years. It's impressive. Every movie hasn't worked, but it's still impressive. Okay, so we're going to start out with Star Wars The Force Awakens. And these movies are laid out semi-strategically, but not really. I want to start here because this is a film for me, and I know I've seen plenty who don't love the movie. This is a film for me that I genuinely think, and I'm going to go ahead and place it on its tier, is great. Why did I do this to myself? Listen, Star Wars The Force Awakens brought back what I loved about the original trilogy. It really did. What I loved, personally, was an establishment of characters that you assumed would come together and do great things, and the build-up of each individual character. Now, did Rey learn some things quickly? Sure. Is there a bit of exposition here and there? Absolutely. But in terms of, on a technical level, straying away from the prequels, and before I go down that rabbit hole, there are things that I love about the prequels. Absolutely. Like I said, I grew up with the prequels. But on a filmmaking level, what we do on this channel, we review movies, right? We try to be as critical as possible. Those films just don't work. Execution-wise, they don't work. Idea-wise, story-wise, they may work even better than some of these Disney films, than most of these Disney films. But from an execution standpoint, I think The Force Awakens really delivered some awesome moments, some incredible filmmaking. The shots are beautiful. Only a few moments here and there that I wasn't the biggest fan of. The Rathtar scene, I'm like, yeah, and it is kind of a rehash of A New Hope, but at that point, where we were, because if we recall, before The Force Awakens, and I understand a lot of the hardcore prequel fans were really young at that point and didn't really have the opportunity to yell at us for not enjoying the prequels as much as them at that point anyways, but when The Force Awakens comes out, it was kind of unifying all Star Wars fans for a couple of months. The inevitable backlash comes. I still think the movie is great for what it is, and I believe at the time, especially, looking back, maybe not so much, but at the time it was a great Star Wars film, and it still is for me going back and rewatching all of these movies. Really enjoyed my time with The Force Awakens. This is Star Wars A New Hope. I've been seeing some people online lately talk about how they go back and they revisit A New Hope, and it's just too slow. A New Hope is just so slow, and incredible is where I'm putting it. Listen, I understand A New Hope is a tad bit slow, and if you look at it from a certain perspective, it is a tad bit dated, to be honest. But I compare it to some of the newer movies that we'll talk about here in a bit on a technical level from a look standpoint, and it looks really good, man. You can tell they were working with a small budget, but making the most of a small, I guess, budget is what these movies are all about, because Star Wars started from an idea that spawned from the brilliant mind of George Lucas, and this is his most well-directed movie by far. He did a great job with the characters, establishing everyone that we know and love, from Luke to Leia to Han. So many iconic moments and memories in this film. Going back and rewatching it was a treat. It was a joy. I love A New Hope, and no one can take that away from me. Okay, here we go. Star Wars Episode 1, A Phantom Menace. And I know, I understand, it has its fans. If you watch this when it first came out, you're like 19, 20 right now. So you're at the age where you can get online and yell because The Phantom Menace is the greatest movie to ever exist. I get it. I'm not that much older. I grew up with this movie as well. I watched it 10, 20, 30 times on VHS. I had a Jar Jar Binks action figure. I didn't understand at the time that I believe Jar Jar is just not a very good character. Going back and watching The Phantom Menace, there are 2 to 3 moments in this movie that completely blow me away. I love the pod racing scene. Of course, the Darth Maul battle, one of the best, most epic battles in Star Wars history. The score from John Williams, Duel of Fates, one of the best to ever exist. It's so good. But my issue with this movie, from a look standpoint, CGI, I get it. George Lucas was trying to be game-changing. Does not hold up. Jar Jar. And I get, Lucas has said, he's like, this is a movie made for kids. Clearly, I loved it as a kid. I go back and I watch it now. Doesn't hold up. I think 2/3 of this movie is either a bit boring or a bit sloppy or a bit messy. The idea, once again, I don't want anyone to get this confused. I believe the ideas for Phantom Menace and another movie we're going to talk about, they are there, they are present, and they work. And as a trilogy, I honestly look back on the prequels now in a more positive light than I did a year, 2 years ago, because I'm starting to appreciate the fact that they had an end goal in mind, whereas a certain other trilogy more recently just kind of scrambled through each movie. And I can respect that. I can appreciate that. But as a standalone individual movie, I think it is sadly a mediocre movie with some wonderful moments, right? But just because a movie has wonderful moments doesn't mean I can place it on a tier based on 2 to 3 5-10-minute spans. Next up is Star Wars Return of the Jedi. So my score for this film out of 10 is very similar to a movie that I'm actually going to end up putting on the good Star Wars tier. But just because something is a good Star Wars movie doesn't mean I don't think it's a great movie. But I think Return of the Jedi is a great Star Wars movie. And here's why. It really encapsulates the movies that came before it. And I do believe, spoiler, I guess, for Empire Strikes Back, I do believe the 2 movies before it were stronger. One, from a filmmaking perspective, I think this one is a tad bit sloppier. And 2, I think they're a bit more epic. I think they know their characters a tad bit more. And this movie, out of the 3 original trilogy movies, feels a bit more thrown together than the other 2, but that does not mean it's a bad film. I think Return of the Jedi has some of the most iconic moments from Star Wars history. Every character completes their arc in such a way, and it all felt so established and beautiful and glorious, and it really is the hero's journey. It's the ultimate hero's journey. Luke is so good in this movie, and I love how this film starts off with the passing of time without telling you how much time has passed, but just hinting through subtle moments with the characters. I thought it was just a brilliant way to do it. Now, you would ask me 5 years ago, I thought this movie was possibly one of the best in the trilogy. Things maybe haven't aged as well. It started to lean a bit more into what the prequels inevitably ended up being with a few of the storylines. I've come around on the Ewoks, but a few things that happened in Jabba's palace, I'm just like, yeah, all right. And then Lucas has to go in and add the CGI in the early 2000s, and that didn't work. That didn't work. Let's go back to the movie, the original version of the movie, please. Regardless, I think Return of the Jedi is a great Star Wars film, but a movie that I believe is probably the weakest in the trilogy. Next up is Solo, a Star Wars story. So this one is tough because going back and rewatching all of these films, I actually didn't dislike Solo as much as I thought I was going to dislike Solo, because I think of this movie and I think, well, that existed. Watching it back, here's what I want to say about it. If this was not a Han Solo movie, if this was just an adventure of the space bounty hunter played by this actor who resembles Harrison Ford quite a bit, because he does, he looks like him, he sounds like him, I just don't think he quite captures Han Solo. He's very good in the film, two very different things, comparisons, if you will. But it's still a fun movie. Whether it's an introduction or cameos at the end. I mean, the Darth Maul cameo in this movie was awesome, man. I jumped out of my seat when I saw that in the theater. But at the end of the day, I'm going to say it's an okay Star Wars movie. It is not as ridiculously bad as I believe some people claim it to be. And as a film, as a structured movie, I just think it's a better movie on a technical level than the ones that are going to end up below it. I do. But as a Star Wars film, not as many iconic moments. Some of the characters, I think L3, was that the name L3? Eesh, I didn't like that character. But there were also some characters that I really loved. So a bit of a mixed bag, but overall an okay, albeit somewhat unnecessary Star Wars movie for me. Next up, Attack of the Clones. Let's get this out of the way. I can't get into Attack of the Clones. I can't do it, man. It is a great story. It is such a great story. I love what they're doing with Anakin in this movie, and I love where they're progressing to towards a film that I end up enjoying from that trilogy of films, because I think Lucas learned from his filmmaking mistakes in the prior two films. It's just so green screen and so CGI, and you can say that about all of these films, but just look. I mean, the second this movie starts out, my wife looks at me and she goes, "Oh, God." Like, oh, man, this looks bad. And I'm like, yeah, it does. It does. And if you grew up with Attack of the Clones, you're fighting your computer screen. You got the boxing gloves on, and you're just like, dude, come on, man. But the script is terrible. Not the screenplay, not the story. The script is terrible, and the CGI is atrocious. This movie does not hold up. It feels like it's from the early 2000s. But I still like the character progression of Anakin. Say what you will about the sand. The sand.
I don't like sand.
And I'm making this tier list with the most honest intentions in the world. These are my favorite, my least favorite movies. This is just my personal opinion. If you love the prequels, that's fine. We all love different aspects of this saga, and that's the beautiful thing about Star Wars. But for me, Attack of the Clones, as a film, the way it is executed, it just doesn't get there. So to me, it's mediocre Star Wars because it could have executed a lot better. I still think the story progression is there, though. Next up is Rogue One, a Star Wars story. We're going to go ahead and put that on the good Star Wars tier because I think this is good Star Wars. You have really good filmmaking. Now, who ended up being the director? We don't really know that, but really good filmmaking. A story that it does lag a bit in the first two acts, I will agree. And I've seen some people say, well, I don't even remember the characters' names. I remember the characters' names. I do think it does a really good job of building up some of them, and I do believe it. I mean, the payoff of the third act, one of the best third acts of Star Wars history, but filling in the gaps that we didn't know that we needed to fill in with a movie that I think has held up really, really well. Now, it is a film that I go back and I rewatch, and I find myself not skipping, but waiting for moments to happen. But the way that this movie is going to age, just the scale and the look and that slow pace at the end when the devastation happens, man, I love the way that plays out. Of course, the Darth Vader scene. If you haven't seen Rogue One in a while, give it a chance. Go back to it. Check it out, man. I think a lot of people are going to start appreciating this more, especially after how the new trilogy turned out and divided fans so heavily. Okay, so, next up is The Last Jedi. It's The Last Jedi. This is interesting for me because I'm one of those people. Now, say what you will about how many people hate The Last Jedi. I go to IMDb and I see a 7 user score, and I go to Letterboxd and I see more 8s out of 10s than any other score, and I go to Rotten Tomatoes, and that's when they forgot to fix the whole ticketing thing, and that was clearly a lot of bugs in there. I still feel like a lot of people like this movie. They're just afraid to say so because the minority, I'm not saying absolutely the minority, but the people who hated this movie are so vocal about it. Those who liked it, they just don't want to speak up because they frankly just don't want to get in an argument on Twitter. I believe that. Now, here's what I'll say about The Last Jedi. I think as a film, as a movie, the way it's directed, there's no denying Rian Johnson is a great director. He came out and he proved that with Knives Out, one of the best movies of the year. He already proved it to me with Looper. I love Looper. I think it's fantastic. Structure-wise, it is one of the best Star Wars movies. Structure-wise, wait for it. Look at the scene where the ship jumps to light speed. The decision not to use sound in that moment, that is filmmaking 101. The throne room scene, still, I think, one of the coolest battle scenes in Star Wars. And a lot of stuff, the epic moments with Luke at the end, I think they were just handled so well. The subtlety of his foot not making the sand go red, I thought was great. But then you look at how this trilogy played out, and you look at the fact that they just kind of forgot about the movie in the new one. I'm not going to spoil anything. There were elements that carried over, of course, but it really was one of those just, yeah, The Last Jedi, it exists. And even before then, I'm going to be honest, my score has lowered for this film because it just doesn't feel like Star Wars. There are Star Wars-y moments. There are moments that are Star Wars-y, absolutely, and I love the artistic character decisions. I think that all of that is great, but I go back and I watch it cohesively. We went back, we both watched it. The Canto Bight stuff I can't stand. It's Rose and Finn, just not about that life. There are a few things that I just don't like about this movie. So here's what I'm going to do. And this isn't a reaction. This is something that I think this is an okay Star Wars movie, but I think it is such a well-made film, I don't want to put it on that tier. So I'm actually going to go in. So I do believe it is a good movie, but it is not a good Star Wars movie. So I'm going to say it's an okay Star Wars movie. And here's why I'm going to say that is because I do believe some of the moments in there are solid moments. I really do. But it really doesn't hold a candle to some of these other Star Wars films. I'm sorry. It doesn't. My filmmaking brain is saying love it. My Star Wars brain is saying hate it. I can't. So we made a tier. We're going to put it there. If you're saying I'm compromising because I made, yes, I am. Okay. Next up is Revenge of the Sith. Now, here's something that's going to shock a lot of people. On a technical level, I don't think this is as good as movies that are below it, but I think it's a good Star Wars movie. I think Revenge of the Sith is a good Star Wars movie. I do. The dialogue is so much better in this movie. It's still a tad bit cringeworthy, and there's some cringeworthy moments and some predictable moments and moments full of exposition, but it learned from its mistakes. I think Lucas does a really good directing job here, his best out of that trilogy by far. And there are some iconic and epic moments, memeable moments that have just taken the internet by storm, and it made me respect the living heck out of Hayden Christensen, because what he had to deal with, the scrutiny for all those years. See, a lot of people don't remember this because a lot of people were too young. Hayden Christensen was hated for a long time by most people, and it was disgusting, and I couldn't stand it because I enjoyed him. And now people are starting to come around and realize that Hayden Christensen did as good as he possibly could have done with the script that he had for the majority of the trilogy, but he ended up delivering on what I think a lot of people wanted to see. I don't want to be misquoted. Structure-wise, there are a few of these movies below it that I just think are better. But as a Star Wars movie, it is so good and so iconic and so memorable, I just have to put it on that tier. So for me, Revenge of the Sith is good Star Wars. Now we come to Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker and Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back. So I do think this is a better Star Wars experience than The Last Jedi. But on a movie level, I just thought it was very sloppy. I do need to see the film again, because in my brain, I am starting to accept some of the moments a little bit more, but once again, I can't get past how structurally sloppy and messy the first two acts were. Even though I had a great time with the final act, there were still some decisions in there. I'm just like, oh, and the guy on Twitter that said, oh, they went to Reddit and they found every fan theory and they did this and that. I'm like, yeah, I can't disagree. That's exactly what they did. Whether you like that sort of thing or not, you know, I am right now going to say this is okay Star Wars because we wanted a better payoff. We wanted a movie that flowed like milk and honey. We wanted a movie that was so smooth it was butter. We just fly through the first two acts and we're embracing, accepting all of these character decisions. But even those who love this film love it for its moments. They don't necessarily love it for its structure. And even the ones who I'm hearing are loving the movie, they're saying, well, it wasn't that good of a film, but I had a great time with it. And that's awesome, man. But I can't put it on a higher tier if it's not a good movie. And I'm not saying it's not a good movie. I like it significantly better than a lot of critics that I know on Twitter. There's so much wrong with it in my head right now. I'm placing it on this tier, but that could change. And I'm telling you guys to follow me on Letterboxd because we're going to see it again here in the next couple of days. Things could change. They could get worse, always, but they could absolutely get better. But once again, it's okay. Like, Star Wars is like cake, man. I keep saying it. And the most obvious spot for a movie of all time, it's Empire Strikes Back. This is incredible Star Wars. I don't need to say any more because I will probably talk about this movie on another list that I'm doing in the near future. I'm going to be giving you guys my favorite movies of all time shortly. I'm working on that right now. And The Empire Strikes Back is absolutely going to make that list because I love everything about it. I truly, deeply love you. That's from the prequels. I really do, guys. I think the original trilogy is one of the greatest trilogies of all time. It does everything you want a fantasy, sci-fi, epic, action, blockbuster series to do. And a lot of people still say that ended. The Star Wars saga ended with Return of the Jedi, and I understand why. But once again, do you see any bad Star Wars movies? Now, maybe the two at the bottom I don't think are all that good of films. But there are so many great moments in both of those movies, I can't say there is a bad Star Wars film because I am so in love with Star Wars. I really am. And I think what a lot of these movies are doing, whether it's in that gray tier, dividing fans, whether it's in the okay Star Wars tier where it has its defenders, and I do believe one of those movies I could come around on eventually. Revenge of the Sith was down there at one point, and now I'm putting in the good Star Wars movie because going back and rewatching these films changed my perspective on a lot of them. It really did. So take with that what you will. And I'm sorry if I offended anyone. I posted my Rise of Skywalker review, and I got spammed with like 14 dislikes in 3 seconds. Now, those were later taken away because YouTube knows when someone gets spammed. But still, stuff like that, I'm just like, why? Thank you guys for being honest, understanding, loving Star Wars. Some will be hating Star Wars, but for the most part, loving Star Wars if you're watching this video. And just having a really good time with me on my channel. If you were wondering what this thing is, I got this pin from opening night for the final Star Wars saga movie I will ever be seeing in the theater. And regardless of what we feel about the movies as a whole, and that movie in particular, I mean, I can't believe it was the last one. Well, I mean, what a ride this saga's been. What a ride this saga's been. Love this franchise. Really do. Can't wait to go see the new movie again. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stick around because another video is coming today, really special one, a countdown. So I'll see you soon.